Thank you guys all for coming out. So what I'm going to talk about tonight, quickly, is immigration, right? So immigration, more than any election that I can remember, is something that has been thrust into the forefront of this election, right? So a lot of it started early on in the Republican primaries when Trump sort of cut his teeth talking about building the wall, right? So we all know about the wall, or at least I imagine we all know about the wall. And so Democrats have sort of positioned themselves as being, I guess, anti-wall people. And what I wanted to do, instead of just looking specifically at Trump and Clinton on this, is I wanted to talk a little bit more generally about ethical issues surrounding immigration. And then you guys can do your own homework to figure out where you should land on some of this. All right, so just a quick introduction. So to say that, you know, I am anti-immigration or pro-immigration, that's far too simplistic, right? There are different types of immigration, and there are even subtypes of immigration in these different categories. But I just want to, you know, focus on two of these primarily. So let's talk about these. So you have your normal or classic immigration. So let's say whatever candidate that you hate wins, and you go, I'm moving to Canada, right? So you go to the border of Canada and you say, I'll take one Canadian citizenship, please, and then fill out the paperwork and whatever and learn their national anthem that we all know from watching hockey games, and they let you in, right? Obviously it's more complicated than that, I think. I would hope it's more complicated than that. But that's the normal type of immigration where people you know, are recognized, they go through government channels, they enter, do their application process, testing, whatever, they stay. Then you have undocumented or illegal immigration, right? So once again, let's say a candidate you hate wins, and once again, they're going to go to Canada. They tell you, no, I'm sorry, we have far too many angry Americans trying to get in here. Go back and deal with the mess that you've made. And you wait until their backs are turned, and then you just book it into the country and try to start your life there. Right, so someone who is an undocumented immigrant is someone who has violated established procedures for entry and or stay within a nation, right? Then we have refugees, right? Refugees are a different category. Some would think that I maybe shouldn't even include them here. But we've been talking about them a lot in this election. So refugees are people who are fleeing violence, political violence, you know, ethnic, religious violence, and they're attempting to create a home someplace else because they can't stay where they were anymore, right? So that's that type of immigration. So in this election, we've been primarily focused on two of these things, undocumented immigration and refugees, right? So the question that I would like you all to ask yourselves, and do reflect on this, is does a nation have a completely unqualified right to self-determination? That is to say, does a nation have just unlimited ability to decide who comes in, who can't come in, what sort of people we want to have here, and if you don't fit those parameters, or if you come in and you don't know about it, do we have an unlimited right to just kick you back to wherever you came from? So most philosophers think that we have a qualified power to admit, and we can talk more about that in a minute. But anyway, let's focus on refugees first. Maybe we'll touch on some of that other stuff. I'll do my best Marco Rubio impression. Hold on. You got it. I appreciate that. The students who are here who take my classes are no stranger to not getting my jokes. All right, so as we said before, refugees are people who are fleeing violence, right? And they have a special status as a result of fleeing this violence, right? And the reason they have that special status is the idea is, look, if we don't take these people in, if we don't help them out, then something really bad is going to happen to them, potentially, right? So I can remember a story when I was living in Chicago of a Sudanese refugee, a guy who was trying to seek asylum. He arrived in Chicago, declared himself as a refugee, went before the court. They determined that he didn't fit the bill, even though he was fleeing political violence, and they sent him back. I'd ask you to guess what happened to him. Thankfully, he survived. He was just imprisoned and repeatedly tortured. He managed to escape and made his way back to the United States again, I guess to just tell us that, hey, you were wrong. But we managed to keep him that time, right? So that's an example of what happens when you deny entry to a refugee, potentially, right? And that's why they have that special status from the UN, right? Now, in philosophy, probably the most prominent thinker who discussed refugees was a guy named Immanuel Kant. And he wrote this book called Perpetual Peace, where he talked about what would it take in order for there to be, unending peace on Earth. And the very first thing that he says, sort of jokingly, was that, well, the first way to do this is just for everyone to be dead. Which I guess he was joking. He was German, so maybe that's a German joke or something, I don't know. But then he ends up establishing a set of rules that all nations should abide by in order to establish this peace. And one of those is what he calls a right to hospitality, right? So in the context of regular immigration, hospitality means that we can tell you you can't come in, but if we let you in, we're going to be nice to you. We're not going to ostracize you. We're not going to, paint you with a broad brush and say you're a bad person and all people who look like you are bad. But we have the right to say you can't come in. The only exception to this for Kant, and there was just one, were people who, if we turned them away, might be killed. Now that was an unwavering exception for him. That the cost of turning them back was just too great, right? From a purely moral perspective, it was something that we couldn't do. So in connection with this, and it's something that I would encourage all of you to do more research on, there is, in sort of conjunction with this right to entry, nations have a recognized right to vet people who enter the country. Right? So the United States, for example, has a process by which we vet people. And it's a very long process. In fact, refugees are the most vetted, background-checked group of people who come into this country already. Now, I know that a lot of rhetoric gets thrown around about, extreme vetting and things like that. I'm not entirely sure what extreme vetting really means. But for those of you who might be confused about the process, and I'm sure a lot of you are, right? Because we don't often take a look at this stuff, especially if you were born here, because why would you bother reading about refugee stuff and immigration stuff? You're already here. You've made it. America, right? That's already happened for you. But I would encourage you to take a look at the process, because you can find it. And if you need some help with that, I'd be happy to point you in the right direction. All right. Now we'll move on to undocumented or illegal immigration, right? So we have this vision in our head of what the undocumented immigrant looks like. And the vision is the type of person who would be stopped by the wall, right? So it's somebody from Mexico sneaking across the border, and we don't know about it, and they come here and do whatever it is that they're going to do, right? Now, that's not an entirely accurate, it's just not accurate, depiction of undocumented immigration, right? That does happen, for sure, right? But a decent portion of undocumented immigration occurs when people come here legally, right? They get some sort of a visa, and instead of going back home when it expires, they just decide to stay, right? So that's another way this can take place. Now, something that is important in this debate, and we can all land on different places here. I'm not going to tell you you have to, side with Clinton or with Trump. But before you can really have an accurate opinion, you need to get beyond some of the rhetoric here, okay? So some pieces of rhetoric are things like that they are more violent. Undocumented immigrants commit more crimes than citizens of the United States. That's not true. We have some data to back that up. Again, I would be happy to point you in the direction of that. There's a big fear that folks are coming over here and they're not paying their taxes and they're using our social services, right? So you have this idea of somebody sneaking across the border and then collecting food stamps and not paying taxes. Well, that also isn't happening, with rare exception, right? So it was actually Bill Clinton, I believe, who stopped welfare benefits to undocumented immigrants, with the exception of children and mothers. That's the exception, right? So for example, if you come to the United States and you're undocumented and you're 7 years old, we'll give you an education. We'll let you come to school, right? We're just going to do that for you. But they do also pay taxes. In fact, there's some data to demonstrate that they pay billions of dollars in taxes and don't really reap much in the way of benefits from systems like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. Right? I'll just do two more really quick. There's an idea that they're coming over here and having a negative economic impact. That is to say, they're taking their job, right? So, again, that's not really happening. There's some debate to be had, and I think where the interesting debate to be had there is in association with lowering the wage floor. There's some concern about that. But as far as having an overall negative economic impact, that's just not something that we can tell is happening. They're also not increasing in number, right? The borders are not about to open, ladies and gentlemen, and people are going to flood in. They're not, right? Ever since the housing market crash, the number of undocumented immigrants has been going down. And the reason it's been going down is quite simple. There's less work and less money, right? So they're not going to come here if they can't make it beneficial, right? So those numbers have been going down. So let's talk about what the actual ethical conflict is here, right? Because there is a conflict, right? From some of the stuff that I just said, and I'm sure you're thinking like, well, that's all stuff that Trump is saying, right? Because most of it is, right? Or you might be thinking that I'm just going to come down 100% in favor of, Clinton's policy, or gasp, even more heretical than that, a blanket amnesty like Ronald Reagan implemented, which people seem to conveniently forget about, right? There is an actual ethical conflict here, and it's a conflict between two norms, two rules, two commands, right? The first is that you should not violate rules or benefit from violating rules, right? So if I cheat at cards, right, I shouldn't, that's wrong. I'm winning all of this money, I'm cheating at cards, that's bad. I'm breaking the rules and profiting from it, right? So that's a general thing that we think is bad. The other thing that we think is bad is forcibly removing people from their homes, right? You have a right to live where you want to live, by and large. And more than some sort of legal right, you form attachments to your home. You do, right? Now, there are probably some people in here who lived in this community their entire life. I would have to imagine one or two of you, right? If I told you that you had to get up and get out of here, and not just move out of Loretto or Evansburg or Cambria County, but move from here to just the other side of the country, you probably have a panic attack, right? And that's because you have that deep attachment to home, right? So when we are talking about this from purely ethical perspective, the most prominent philosopher to discuss this is a guy named Joseph Cairns, and he advocates for what we call a pluralistic application of amnesty, where we look at these two things and decide which one should win out. The case that he uses, and I'll close with this and then do the requisite exhort you to go out and vote speech, right? The example that he uses is a woman who lived in Great Britain, and she was 80 years old. And she went to go fill out some sort of paperwork and came to find out that she was actually an American citizen, not a British citizen, and her parents had brought her over when she was 2, and she was 80. And they got ready to deport her. An 80-year-old woman who had lived in Britain for 78 years, and they looked that woman in the face and said, "You're not British." Cairns thinks that's ridiculous. Now, of of course, there's a lot of middle ground between somebody who showed up yesterday and somebody who's been here for 78 years. The question becomes, where do we draw the line? It seems to me. All right, now the voting day. A lot of folks have been, they asked who's voting, and everybody raised your hands, right? And you're lying, right? In the 2014 election, the percentage of voters from 18 to 24 was just under 20%. Right? Now, granted, more people turn out for the presidential elections because who cares about the Senate and the House, right? But I imagine there are some of you who raised your hand just because you felt pressure to do it. Well, to you, I would say two things. One of them was told me by my old man, the other one by a colleague, right? My old man told me, and I'm going to clean this up quite a bit, remove a few four-letter words. He told me that if you don't vote, you don't complain, right? You have the power to make your voice heard, and if you choose not to do that, whoever shows up in office, you didn't do anything about it. So don't complain about it. And the other thing that I'll say, and this is from a colleague of mine, is if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Don't let me and other people who are going to go out and vote decide your future. You have the opportunity to do that yourself. So please, for me, go out and do it. Thank you.